webinar, we've kept a lot of space for question and answers in the agenda. So after the resource persons speak, you will have an opportunity to put your questions on chat, and we'll be requesting the resource persons to answer your questions. Of course, COVID-19 has had a detrimental impact. As it is, the situation was bad. In India, women were dropping out of the formal workforce. The percentage of women working in formal jobs was lower than other countries in the G20. But however, women were entering the informal sector in large numbers. So we are talking about jobs such as beauty parlors or having small scale home businesses or other small businesses, but that has also taken a hit as a result of COVID-19. So, and I know that both employers and employees have to learn to be flexible to cope with the new situation. Work from home seems to be something that's going to stay. It's going to be in place even after COVID comes to an end, which hopefully it will come to gradually. There will be a vaccine, and people will start going out more, but will work from home remain the norm, or will we go back to normal as it was? So as you are really the future workforce, so we need to have these discussions, and I'm looking forward to listening to the resource persons today. With this, I'll thank FES for supporting us, and I'll request Jyoti to say a few words before we open the floor, before we start the webinar.
Yes, thank you so much, Gayatri. Good evening to everyone. Respected panelists, dear participants, gives me immense pleasure to be here on behalf of the German foundation, the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, and to welcome you to today's Gender Log titled COVID-19 and its implications on employment, women, and work. Gayatri has given us a very good, she set the stage very nicely. So there is not much for me to say on that, and we are of course looking forward to the discussions, but I just wanted to speak very briefly about the organization I represent, the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, which is a German foundation and is dedicated to the principles of peace, solidarity, and social justice. It is the largest and the oldest of the German party foundations, and is the political legacy of Friedrich Ebert, who was Germany's first democratically elected president. Friedrich Ebert Stiftung has offices in about 100 countries worldwide, with its head office in Berlin. And in India, we have been active since 1983. Peace, solidarity, and social justice. These are the three main driving principles of the work of the foundation. And in the gender unit, we've been working on women and work and women in politics, and on the issues of gender sensitization. With the series of gender logs, such as this, we want to have a larger outreach to young people of all genders, and we want to be able to build platforms for open discussions and for new ideas with these conversations. We are also an organization that promotes lifelong learning, which in our times, actually in all times, but more so in our times, is a very crucial aspect for staying relevant in the job market. I'm certain you all will agree that this pandemic year has been crazy, confusing, chaotic, challenging in many, many ways for all of us. We've seen enormous and laudable resilience all around us. We've seen a lot of adaptability to the changing times. And following the end of lockdown restrictions, most businesses now and work sectors, they have resumed their operations. But we know that the impact of COVID-19 on the world of work has not been gender neutral. As Gayatri already mentioned, we've seen shrinking workspaces, more so for women, and it's impacted women in particular, this crisis. How and to what extent have women's employments been disproportionately affected by this crisis will be some of the issues that one will kind of put more light on in hopefully in these discussions. And it seemed a very pertinent time to be organizing this kind of discussion, this kind of gender log with the youth. And I am very thankful to Gayatri and Aisha of WPC for being the core people to take these ideas forward. And of course, to all our panelists for your presence here and for being part of these discussions. So I really look forward to enlightening and solution-driven discussions in the next hour and a half that we are going to be together. Thank you very much. And with these words, I hand over the floor back to Gayatri to take forward the proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So the webinar is divided into two sessions. The first session will provide an overview on the impact of COVID on women and work. And in the second session, we have a career advice and a counseling session. So this is beneficial for students who are trying to find a job during these uncertain times. So with that, I would like to invite our first speaker for the panel discussion, Dr. Govind Kelkar. She's a professor and the executive director of Gendev Center for Research and Innovation and a visiting professor at the Council for Social Development. Can you unmute yourself? Yeah.
Okay. Can I go ahead?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So I in about 15 to 20 minutes, I would be short and talking about particularly women's economic situation and women in work, women's empowerment claims that were made earlier in the context of COVID-19, because this is the current situation and that we should be talking about. But other things, related things and historical things, we can take really in the question answer session. So over the past several decades, there has been a slow and partial and fitful changes in women's economic autonomy. We do understand several laws have been passed to strengthen women's social, economic, and decision-making positions. Particularly in 2005 was the landmark year, which was the kind of women were given the Hindu Succession Amendment Act was passed, so succession rights were given to the majority of the population, though not to all. Anti-violence, domestic violence act was passed, and later also that some other laws were passed in the like sexual harassment in the workplace in 2013. So the question is that have these laws weakened the grip of patriarchy, or they are functioning the same in the confines of the traditional power and hierarchy between women and men? So this is the question. And COVID-19, if you look at this situation, it's a mirror image that how things have not changed or they have reversed kind of thing. If they have changed, then they have gone back. Whatever we have gained, we have lost it. That was the... But before that, we talk, what is women's economic empowerment? There are lots of definitions. But in my understanding, the necessary elements of women's economic empowerment, they really comprise a mix of autonomy and dignity. One component feature of one major element or critical element is really women's autonomy and dignity associated with the freedom of choice, freedom of mobility, and freedom from violence. So that is one factor. Second is non-discrimination in work. That would be the another kind of, that means gender parity of wages, remuneration, employment opportunity on par like we have others, and recognition and counting of the household work and the so-called care work, unpaid care work. This is the another major element of the women's economic empowerment. And third is really women's individual, unmediated, right? Not mediated through household and its head. So women's individual and unmediated right to ownership and management of productive assets. And in my analysis, the major productive assets in the context of India can be land, because large number of women are farmers, but they are not recognized as farmers because they don't have that right. housing, they don't have the housing rights, technology and finances, new technology in particular. These in turn provide them the capability to make decisions both within home and outside in the labor market. And that's why this kind of, when we talk of the work situation, then this would be important. So basically our platform for women's work is very, very weak, very fragile, and kind of half broken. It has many cracks in terms of the work kind of the, when we talk of the women's work situation and that kind of platform or economic empowerment of women through work. What has happened in the context of COVID, which is the kind of, some of you must be reading newspapers also, fall in employment of women in the COVID situation. So that is very, very surprising. As such, their work participation were very low, not in real terms, but the work which is counted as work, as productive work or as economic work, they had much, but it has gone down tremendously. There has been widespread job losses in the formal sectors for women. They say, according to one estimate, close to 21 million salaried jobs of, and women are particularly hit in this study. In April 2020, 62% of the men who were employed in December continued to be employed. But for women, those who were employed in December, only 32% of those who were employed had a job. Rest were, they did not. So nearly 2/3 of the employed women were out of work. And it has been going down because those who return after they are coming back, those who return really, large number of them are men and women are very few. So this is really the fall in employment of the, which is considered work, is, or which is recognized as work. There has been tremendous fall in this. So in the context of COVID, I think there are three concerns mainly. One concern is women's unpaid care work. It has increased to enormous proportions. Children are at home and they demand all the time with regard to care, attention and all this that needed. The men are at home, that is they return the work, and they demand also the service and hot food and clean house, children not crying. And so it really presupposes kind of a forced labor of domestic work. And if women don't perform well, then they are beaten up. So there was another study in which we were also involved, that the center was involved. We had the telephonic interview, about 4,500 kind of interviews. And there were three major reasons for which the women were beating. There was violence, domestic violence. One was the children were crying. They were not kind of thing. Other was that there was too much salt or no salt in the food. And third was that they were not paying attention to the care of the husband or husband's parents, in-laws. So these were look at these kind of frivolous issues on which so much violence is there. So there is a surge in the care work and unpaid care work, and there is a surge in the violence. I think this is very important to understand in terms of the connection. And Jyoti, I would really plead with you that we need to look at this kind of surge. Worst thing of this kind is this work is not recognized as work. So already it is on a very unjustified, unjust social platform it is there. So if women are facing violence, I'm not surprised, because poor and unjust situations always make somebody vulnerable more vulnerable, and women are in this kind of situation. Second is really a factor, the second major concern is where feminist economists are involved, the gender division of labor and distribution of power, gender distribution of power, income, poverty, productive assets. They are, and this kind of reviving the economy, where the concern has been made, and they have continued to be. same in the name of the men, and women are giving either little kind of cash transfers, 500 or something as the stimulus packages. I mean, this is ridiculous. 500 with what you do, and with 7% inflation increase. So what is this kind of really issue? So that is what ASHA workers condition has been. Look at the ASHA workers condition. They have not been paid for 4 months. Even if they are paid, what kind of remuneration is there? What kind of they are doing the work in agriculture? They are not, and they are the food producers, food providers at home, but they are not given right to resources, neither land nor house. And where do they go if there is a violence within home? Intensity of unpaid work. Unpaid work was already there. It is not that it has been introduced, but now it has intensified, and it has intensified in kind of brutal form. That you do this work, and if you don't do well because of some reason, and then you deserve the punishment. And this kind of physical or moral, physical or psychological punishment is always there. But now we have seen the cases of physical punishment. Also, it is a part of the labor of domestic unpaid care work. Who does this unpaid care work? That need to be seen. There is always kind of unpaid care work, care of elderly, parents, children. They cannot be raised only by technology. I did my PhD on political economy of China, and one thing I really read about it, that washing machines don't liberate women. We do need washing machines, but that does not mean that it would liberate women. There is something else that we needed. We need kind of resource, we need the sharing of this domestic work also. Reduction, redistribution, and sharing of this work redistribution is required. So increase gender-based violence within home, in workplaces and public spheres. It is not a non-economic social problem. It is very much a kind of forced labor extraction. People might think that it is not a part of the economic problem, it is a social problem. But this is not so. It is really, why women have not gone back? Because largely they are trapped in the care of the children and care of the home and the gender norm. When the jobs are opening, then men would go there, men would take up, and women would take up after that. So this is so there is these kind of situation. So we need to look at two things. We need to really look at that all these things are supported by gendered norms, which policies are very much affected by gendered norms also. What is this hold of gendered social norms? Oh, this is part of our culture. I mean, everything goes in this. But these cultures or these parts of the culture, really, they formulate our policies, they formulate those who implement the policies and those who do not implement the policies. So women's concentration in low-paid, informal sector, gender-based disparity, control on women's mobility, sexual harassment at workplace, and general tolerance for violence against women. These are all part of the gendered norms which we are talking about. And if we are doing the work in the context of kind of youth particularly is important, but also not so young people are also important, because they are making the matters worse that we are living now, which we have seen in the COVID situation. Whatever gains were made, we are in the process of losing them. Some we have already lost, and rest would be lost if we do not address. So youth we need in order for building future, and non-youth, those who are in the policy, those who are in the decision makers, we need their attention, their sensitization, their building their gender responsiveness in the present context. Thank you very much. I think in the given time, I wanted to share this, and any type of questions I would be very happy to address. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kelkar. Now I would like to invite Ms. Rajini Menon. She is the Senior Program Officer in the Girls Education Program, Room to Read, a gender specialist who has been working with many national and international organizations on the issue of women's rights in India for more than 10 years. Hello, ma'am. Good evening.
Hi, good evening. Asha, I have a PPT. If yeah. Can I start?
Yeah.
Is that it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here to talk to the youth and also the organizers. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And I think Dr. Kelkar had set the context very well. And I'll be zooming in a little bit, ma'am, into the professionals, young professionals. And I think it was interesting for me also to hear from you after a long time. So broadly, in my deliberation, I'll touch upon the aspect of female young professionals, the challenges that they encountered. And my presentation is based on the findings that I had, or telephonic conversations with young professionals from different cities. So the focus would be largely on females who are working in the corporates, in the banking sector, in the schools. So all of them. So work from home and work at home. Asha, can you just put it into full screen mode? Is that possible?
Just ma'am, just trying. It's not happening on my side.
Okay, I think I can manage now. Yeah. It has come out. So work from home and work at home. So we've heard a lot about work from home, and that was what many young professionals were looking forward to. And now we have a new concept of work at home. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit on that. As the workplace enters the home, does it have a similar implication on men and women? So this is what I'm just trying to explore. Next slide, Aisha. Yeah. So here I'm looking into the lockdown and beyond that. We know that lockdown was announced taking care of the health risk of the people, and it was a gender blind policy which came in without any kind of separate thought around how it would impact men or women. It was a gender blind policy which came in towards the end of March. And then we see that the impact of that policy, was it neutral, gender neutral? No, it wasn't gender neutral. It had different implications on males and females. And what do we see? We see that when in my research, what I found is that female professionals had it worse. Though we know that when you look into the other categories of women, as ma'am spoke about, frontline workers and those workers who are making, papad making or BD making or basket making from home, so household enterprises. So all of those categories of women, I am not really going into those details. I'm actually looking into the professions which I had mentioned earlier. So what I heard from them is that they had the worst of the time once the lockdown was announced, not soon after that, but a little bit after that. Next slide, please. So what I heard is that before March 2020, work from home was a perk for many female professionals. Everyone was looking forward to a flexible working environment. They can actually work from home, and they have the services of caretakers at home. Kids are in the school, or there are people who could take care of the ailing and the elderly at home. So it was a conducive kind of environment where they can work, and it was there were limitations, as in work from home. When it's work from home availed, the expectations from the employees is that they can actually um, contribute at least 60 to 70%, not 100% of an expectation is there from the employees when they avail the work from home scenario. And what happened is that when lockdown was announced, work at home, initially it was work from home only, but it was looked at as work at home. And it was a smooth sail for many female professionals. What we heard from many of them, even you might have also noticed in the social media walls, that many female professionals shared about their ideas of, reconnecting with friends, rekindling their hobbies, innovative kind of cooking, and with limited grocery because everything was shut down. And also the fun with quality time with children, and also the fun of having this kind of Zoom meetings and all of that. So that initial phase went very well for many female professionals. But when it got to April, what we heard from the female professionals was that they were really overstressed, and the complete scenario had changed. And why? That is what I want to explore here. Next slide, please. As we see that the impact of lockdown was gendered, and we found that females were hit hard, and we find that there was a shoring up of the negative norms, as ma'am spoke about the gender norms, which are the kind of cultural devaluation of women, which was there. It actually came up because the female professionals were actually getting the support of the maids and other domestic support, domestic helps. All of that was completely lost, and they had to actually manage the home on their own. And there was a lot of expectation from them in terms of taking care of the unpaid care work, the caring of the child, and also the elderly and ailing. Also, there was a lot of domestic violence infliction which had happened. And when this was happening at home, they couldn't actually reach out to any support system. We heard from National Commission for Women that there was a WhatsApp number, there was online complaints which were registered, and they actually shared there was a hike in the number of complaints which are registered, but those many were, we know that many had really unreported, and those reported, inquiry had not done. So it was just like online complaint. Those who had access to these digital gadgets, they actually made these online complaints. So there was no real support system for women to reach out to. They couldn't actually get to their parents' home or maybe their friends' home. So all that facility was there was through connecting through phones, but that too with limited space, because most of them were in cities and they were in small apartments, so there was no privacy for them to make the call. So they were actually going through this kind of abuse from their husbands or in-laws. And in this period, they had to actually, they did not have any kind of compensation on work because it was work at home. It was full-fledged work. What happened was that domestic challenges got invisibilized. The workspaces really invisibilized the domestic challenges. The male hours, actually peak male hours creep in 2 to 3 hours, before and after, like 1 hour before and maybe 2 hours after. And if you have to actually connect to the global office or regional office, then you have to stay late hours in the late evenings. Actually the virtual calls went on and actually subsumed your lunch breaks and tea breaks or whatever. So there was all these domestic challenges were completely invisibilized during this phase, and they actually went through a lot of lack of autonomy and personal space. There was nowhere that they could actually ventilate. There was no space, and they were completely overstressed. And there was no much initiation from the HR, also HR. actually trying to cope up with the new systems of working, and they were actually ensuring that systems were functioning and all of that, but not much into the other aspects of well-being of women. Also, the safe online space, ensuring of the online space was also not much of a concern, because there were other priorities for offices. So women were really, really hard hit, as in from April onwards. That's what we heard. Next slide, please. So I'm just sharing a couple of responses, what I heard. This was from an employee of a startup company. That is, she's a single working woman, and she's from a city. And what she's saying is that I have to divide my time between household chores and office work. There's a lot of expectation to support the family when there is no domestic help available. Though her brother is there, the expectation is from her to actually attend to most of the domestic responsibilities at home, because there is no domestic support that is available. So she has to balance, and it was really, really tough time for her. Next slide. Banking professional, she's married and she stays with her in-laws. What she's shared is that my mother-in-law felt that it was disrespectful for me to continue with my office work when the whole family is having free time together. I should have served delicacies for the family when the office has given me a luxury to work from home. So it is basically an off time. That's the expectation from the other family members. So this is because, you know, gender identities as daughters, as mothers, as wives, it's actually, centered around the care work. And you're seen as basically as caregiver, not in as a breadwinner role. So however, you know, you are in whatever position, your role is actually defined in so and so in the domestic space. Next slide, please. This is a response from a school teacher. She's a mother of 2 children. What she's saying is that she's to prepare for her class and online teaching, which became difficult as I had to attend to the needs of my children at home, and I have to balance both. So she has to actually prepare for her students and also take care of her 2 kids. And because of the school closures, their exams and their studies are also attended by her. Along with that, she has to actually take care of the other domestic responsibilities of cooking and all of that. So she was saying that, you know, there was nothing that school could do at that point of time, and it was a real struggle for me. And also she went through the kind of pay cut and other aspects which she was mentioning. But basically these kind of, you know, in the domestic space, what challenges that these professionals underwent, they were really, really invisibilized. That is what we hear from many female professionals. Next slide. This is from a corporate professional. She was staying with her abusive husband. She was going through a strained relationship, and in-laws were also there. And what she shared is that there was some kind of scene which was there, and it ended in a heated debate, and I was beaten up. I ran out and sought help from my neighbors. Later, my relatives got in touch with my in-laws, and I moved to my uncle's place, which was in the next lane. Now I feel better. So she couldn't actually reach out to, you know, any of the support systems or any of her friends. So, you know, she actually forgot about everything. She ran out and she sought the help of the neighbors. So the expectations from the office is not matching. They are not really getting what women is going through in her domestic space. So these kind of inflictions of violence were also, extreme forms of inflictions of violence were also happening with women. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is from a public relationship officer. She's married and she lives with her family. What she shared is that workload has increased with continuous office calls, and there were regular checks by supervisors. Some managers are sensitive to the challenges, but some managers just ignore them. So basically, she's saying that, you know, during this period, there was a lot of, you know, changes which has happened within the system. So to cope up with that, there were a lot of expectations, irrespective of whether it's a female employee or male employee. So that kind of sensitivity was lacking within the seniors of her office, and she had to actually adjust whatever challenges at home with the workload that came, and also the continuous checks by the supervisors. So that was really a challenge for her. Next slide. So all of these responses are really, just a tip of the iceberg. What we heard, we know that most of it actually came in different studies, and you've actually seen in media. As per ILO report, which is already there in 2018, we know that women in urban India spent 312 minutes a day on unpaid care work, and men did 29 minutes. There in villages, it was 29 and 32. So you see the kind of disparity which is there. A pandemic has not really succeeded in actually shifting the needle on these gender gaps of paid and unpaid care work. But what it did was that, as ma'am said, it's already there. We know that the unpaid care work burden is there, and women are actually coping with those systems and actually take themselves, their boundaries, and trying to reach, break those glass ceilings and reach at a higher level. But we know that this disparity actually was brought to light somewhere with a sharp focus as couples and families were confined to their homes during the strict countrywide lockdown. And this actually came in most of the media. And I would say that many chief ministers had really announced in their messages, which were going press conferences, which are happening, that domestic work has to be shared equally at home. So at least the pandemic brought to light though it did not shift anything, but it actually brought to light the kind of burden that women are going through when they have to balance the paid and unpaid care work. I would say that, so this is really, this could be seen as an opportunity as well, So many a time we see the kind of humanitarian situations when it happens, there are opportunities also that come with that. So on a positive note, I feel like, next slide please. So the emergencies have the potential to shift the existing negative norms. So what could be done, and what many organizations which are sensitive are actually working around, is they are looking into how could the working norms be more responsive. Now, if we are asking female employees to get to office, even if the lockdowns, lifting of lockdowns, some offices are opened and some are still at work at home. But how many women do have this access of private vehicles, and they totally depend on the public conveyance. So then the amount of time they take, the kind of effort they need to take to actually avail those conveyances to reach the office, all of these matters a lot. So how could be more responsive policies be brought in during this period to come into a new normal? So these are opportunities where the offices, where the policies in the offices could be actually revised, and more gender responsive policies can come in. It is also an opportunity for creating a safe working space for women, because most of the policies here talk about the sexual harassment, which is actually, in person what they happen. We don't really concentrate on the online kind of infliction of violence and that kind of harassments which are happening. So those are ways that the policies, the official policies could be looked into. Those angles could also come in. How could you create a safe online space for women to work? Now, another aspect is the support systems. So we knew that the kind of, the kind of challenges that women went through, and also we will have to cope up with the new normal, and with the lockdown lifting and all of those new systems will come in slowly only. So how would be more sensitive enough to females to support them, actually also the sensitive males to support them, to see that whether there is adequate care support for the children or the elderly, and what kind of policies could actually take care of these aspects. Another aspect is addressing the digital gender divide. So many professionals at the higher level, we know that they have these kind of digital gadgets and the data card issues are not there. But those at the lower rung, they actually go through these pay cards and all of that. So how would we ensure that there is no digital gender divide between the employees? So maybe these school teachers, they're working with their phones, but many of the males, they might have their laptops. So as ma'am said, that kind of asset distribution in the economy is still unequal. So how do we ensure that they have adequate access to the digital gadgets? So that could also be addressed at this point in time. Within the domestic space, a wonderful opportunity to talk about care work, especially among the youth, how we can actually bring those kind of negotiations within our domestic spaces and have that kind of sharing between the parents, between the brother and sister, so that we come up with, we cope with the new normal, and that actually helps in bringing more women to the labor force participation. So I think, it's not about only and only policy side. It's about individuals as said, also including the young women, how they don't get demotivated, how they can actually negotiate in those spaces. So how do you really work around those? And also at the policy side, how the employers can actually work around making the policies more responsive, gender responsive to the new normal. So if we can actually work around these two, I'm sure that this new normal could be a great opportunity for more women to be in the workplace, and hopefully we can have more women breaking the glass ceiling and achieving heights. That's all from my side. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rajni. So we can take questions now.
Does anyone has questions? You can drop in the comments, please. I don't. Should I just start, because I don't think there are any questions right now.
Somebody had just raised.
Anybody has questions?
Yes, there is one from Damayanti.
Okay, the question is, are there any good examples of COVID times good corporate policies? If anyone wants to take that up.
I can go in. I can say we are looking for good practices really internationally, because both nationally and internationally, what is coming to my mind is really at the moment an international policy. In some countries, like in France and other things, first thing that violence against women or domestic violence against women in the pandemic has really is globally increased. In India, it is 100%, but in France, it was 30%. In China, probably we don't have exact figures, but some say 25 to 30%. So, and in Singapore and many other countries. So now in Europe or France in particular, there is a good practice has been introduced that women who face this kind of domestic violence but transferred to a hotel kind of thing. They have assigned a number of hotels where they could feel safe and they could kind of relax. I don't know really to what extent, how many days they lived. I mean, I did not study except seeing that what kind of shelters were available or the government provided the shelter. These are the public policy kind of thing. When the woman faced this kind of violence and she felt very helpless and nowhere to go, then the government came in support. So this was one good practice that I would think that that is important to keep in mind. that some kind of it becomes a government policy to address the question of violence during this period. That is what important. So she was relieved of the care work that she was doing, because that she was being for even for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I don't know how long she was there, but definitely for about a couple of weeks. And she was also kind of removed from that violent situation.
There's another question. Why is there silence and lack of support from the print media or any other source regarding domestic violence? Anybody wants to take that?
I can. Yeah. One second. Yes, I think, the print media had been coming up with, I would not say there wasn't any kind of reporting which had happened. I think a couple of media reports were there which talked about domestic violence as an issue. They called it as shadow pandemic, though I don't personally agree with that. I feel like a structural. But I think, domestic violence as an issue was cited by many media, online as well as mainstream. So it was there, and NCW WhatsApp numbers were there. But the fact is that, women are not really able to get the kind of adequate support. You register the complaint, you go from this portal to that portal, a lot of other, challenges. They need the kind of immediate support, which is not really available. So what is really reliable for women is that, when there are small NGOs or those who are connected to those referrals, those service providers, they are really getting that kind of support. But otherwise, I think most of the women are really missed out, and they don't know whom to approach, where to approach, and the kind of conveyance which was there, which wasn't there at that point of time, to actually reach out to the Sakhi centers, or where government was announcing. It was really challenging for women. And even to reach out to the social mobilizers of small NGOs, it was challenging. And one story which I heard from India, I think from the state of Chhattisgarh, is that, when the women actually reached out to, she couldn't reach out to the social mobilizer of the NGO, but she was called from her neighbor's phone, and then the neighbor called the social mobilizer. And the social mobilizer tried to reach out to the Sakhi center, but then they wanted the woman herself to make a call from her phone to the Sakhi center, which is not really possible. So there were a lot of challenges, though, there were numbers which were published at that point of time. There was a lot of around, you can make calls to these numbers, but real support was not reaching women. So, and the media, whatever they could do was basically report around all of these issues. I think 50% justice was done to that sort of reporting.
There's one more question. Will the success of Kamala Harris as a woman have any kind of impact on the betterment of women in India?
I think that, well, if anyone would like to answer, sure, but
You want to answer? Why don't you go ahead, Gayatri?
Well, yes, great, Kamala Harris. I think with the pandemic, one thing that did come out was that where there are women leaders, at least in the initial phase, it showed that women leaders were better at controlling and handling the pandemic, whether it is in New Zealand or whether it was in Kerala, or where at the local level where women have been given political power. So I hope with the success of Kamala Harris, more women are inspired to take up political positions in India and to take up administrative jobs and work on administration. So hopefully, yes, it will have an impact.
Hi, Gayatri. Just I have one point. I'm Tara.
Yeah.
Hi, Govind.
Hi, how are you?
Ages.
Ages.
Ages. Oh, it was lovely hearing you after so long.
Thank you.
Yeah, I thank you, Miss Menon, also. Very good. And I just wanted to say one thing, working in the health sector for us for some time, looking at women's issues and those kind of things. What I found was that there is so much of forced sex, number one, and unplanned pregnancies, which are a very big problem for women. And the reasons can be many, but especially in the lower strata, the space and place what women had before, when men went away, and even sitting together, those kind of things, that's all lost. So in the bargain, and then I was talking to few women who were asking me for violence issues. I do give them a shoulder to cry because I can't do anything else. Family planning is not going to be reaching them anywhere during this pandemic. So what I found was reaching these women are not doubly, at least 10 times they are going through emotional stress, apart from the physical stress that everybody goes through. And to top it all, the children's burden, economic burden, and if you look at it, even their social space that they had, if you look at the maids category, they had a social space, even that is lost. So I just wanted to flag off these issues also, because it's a kind of a never-ending list that is going on during this pandemic. Though people do say that it is your family time, family space, everybody forced you to have this. But I think women are the worst hit. And here I would like to say every strata, not only the poorest of the poor, every strata is suffering of space and pace. That's all. Yeah. I know it's so difficult, but anyway, I'm sure there is always going to be a light at the end of the tunnel, and we women can think and we bring about that change. I'm sure we will do it with the support service, whatever we can as women provide for each other, provide to each other, and also become very conscious about the issue and help another woman in whatever little way we can do. And I'm sure we will make a better space for women.
Sure. I wanted to add to what was the other question about why media is taking it lightly. I think that really there is not only media, but there is a general tolerance for violence against women. And I have heard so many people during this period saying that, oh, it happens in the crisis period. It happens as if it is really the part of the crisis period.
Yeah.
So I said, what kind of crisis you are talking about? Oh, so they are saying that it happens in war, it happens in conflict situation, and it is now the men are economically stressed, so that's why they are doing it. And I said, that is kind of quite funny that women are not economically stressed because they have to provide for all the family members for food, care, and other things. But the reasons may be many, but the question is that there is a general tolerance for kind of violence against women in a given situation. Only when something very kind of drastic happens, like a gang rape or something, then the media projects it. Otherwise, the general kind of thing, it just goes on. And non-action by the state and non-action by the kind of, and the so-called in the family harmony, or the kind of institution of family, which is called nurturing institution. But the question is, the funny is that if women do not raise this nurturing institution of family, how it has become violent for women, that needs to be addressed, kind of thing. That need to be, we need to change the whole kind of restructure the institution of family. We want to restructure the other institutions also, but restructuring the institution of family, we have to do this. And it can be only done by when we have really two things. We have economic rights for women in terms of the asset rights, in terms of wealth rights, and we have the kind of change in social norms. And change in social norms is not something that we have never addressed. We have kind of removed the sati pratha, where the kind of, we have removed the untouchability kind of legally, and we have removed many other kind of things. Recently in 2016, when the LPG was introduced in the name of the woman, whether that woman is married, single, so in any way, widowed, and nobody objected to it. So the question is, taking this shelter in the name of that, oh, this is part of our culture. I think this needs to be addressed thoroughly. It needs to be addressed with policy and practice. Then only it is possible to change the stranglehold of patriarchy with really and masculinized norms or masculinity norms. This is a fundamental thing in order to change our economic system and change the pandemic kind of resources. Not resources, pandemic relief.
I think we have a last question about pregnant women, those who are on maternity leave, and was it beneficial or they had to face any kind of negative outcome?
I can go. Yeah. So I think, we heard about the issues that pregnant women had to go through. It was really difficult for them to reach the hospital, and they were also raped in many cases. We have heard from the media that they had to go through inflictions of violence, extreme forms of violence in the hospitals, and they were not really getting the kind of support and medical support because the priority was basically the COVID patients. Mm. And access to those hospitals were challenging for women, and their checkups and everything uh, really affected. And also, I would like to cite the case of a state in India where the boundary, the border of two states were really closed at that point of time. So because they said that you can't have the entry from state A to state B because of COVID restrictions, and the village which was in between that, pregnant women, they had to actually travel, which the hospital, which was like 20 minutes far, they had to actually travel more than 1 hour to the hospital, taking the whole other route, more than 1 hour or 1.5 hours. So it actually impacted their health, and in very critical situations were reported from those states. So there were real challenges, different forms of challenges that women had to go through, and I see the kind of suicides also, suicides which I see that the impact on livelihood really created a kind of challenging situation for households to move on, and especially those who are running the family enterprises, their incomes were really impacted. The young girls whose we have heard the stories of how they actually did not have access to digital gadgets at that point of time, and their parents were not able to provide them because of their financial stringency. They had to they committed suicide. So we hear a lot of stories which are very disheartening of young girls as well as women, especially the pregnant women. Also, the young girls whose sexuality was faded in many states because the family was going through such a financial crisis. So their sexuality was traded at that point of time by clicking photographs and then a sale of that which was happening. So all of those different forms of challenges the families are going through, and the basic challenges around livelihood. There is no job which is available, and the panchayats and all of them are not really mapping the kind of skill sets which are available in the panchayat, that kind of livelihood mapping and all of that, which is not happening. All these returned migrants, they have come back, but still they are figuring out of how to get a job back in the city. So different forms of challenges, and of course for women, it's worse.
Okay, moving forward, I would like to invite Mr. Sachin Kumar for the career counseling session. He is currently a faculty at Government College of Teacher Education, Dharamshala. He has been working with youth on the issues of studies, careers, relationship, and democratic citizenship for the last 22 years. Sir, can you switch on your video?
Hi, yeah. Hello, everyone. Good evening to all of you. Aisha, I would want to share my screen.
You can share your screen.
Okay. Is it visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good evening once again, and I really thank Dr. Govind Kelkar and Dr. Rajni Menon for giving an interesting and very broad-based overview of women and work interface during pandemic times. I would largely be addressing my presentation to students. So the way I have titled my presentation is Navigating Troubled Waters, Career Decision Making During Pandemic and Its Aftermath. It's not that it is the pandemic which troubled the waters. For women and for many other disadvantaged group, water has always been troubled actually, but the situations like pandemic simply have exacerbated the magnitude of it. So with this backdrop, let me give some introductory remarks to what I'm going to present. The participant to this webinar belong to diverse context. I mean, in terms of region, I think we have registration from students from Kashmir to Andhra Pradesh, from Nihu to the northeast to Mumbai, different parts of the country, and some international students as well. And they are at different occupational followings. For example, 1/3 of them are students. I think 1/5 of them are research scholars, and remaining are largely teachers and even sales consultant and international consultant. So there is a wide range of participants to this webinar, which resulted into a diverse set of questions. And at this point of time, I would like to thank Aisha for actually putting these questions together in a document and sharing with me. I'll be, basically using what Aisha has done as a homework. I cannot take up all the questions because, as I just pointed out, I have received a wide array of questions, and it is not possible to cover the responses to all the questions in a time span of 15 to 20 minutes. So I have just picked up common concerns like uncertainty, confusion, and that kind of questions, helplessness. All these kind of questions I have just covered. And of course, there have been questions pertaining to policies. For example, what government should do. So in this short presentation, I won't be discussing the policy issues. So I have deliberately left out those questions. The first important remark which I would want to make at this point is we have been living in a VUCA world for quite some time. For most of you, this phrase is familiar, but for some of the students, this phrase may not be familiar. VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. This phrase has been in use for quite some time before pandemic, and these 4 features characterize current world and current labor market as well. So volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Pandemic, as I said just at the very outset, has just exacerbated the magnitude of the uncertainty, the volatility, and complexity and ambiguity. So the key questions which I will be covering are as under. What are the impacts of COVID-19 on youth employment? 3 of the participants have asked these questions in their registration form. And how to make career decisions in these difficult times. Here, I would want to highlight the career decision-making process is largely, universal, but it takes particular shades because we belong to different contexts. So there are universal elements and there are particular elements. I'll be briefly pointing out towards that. And then I'll be focusing on how to deal with uncertainties and confusion. And then what skills and attributes. 3 students have asked these questions. What skills and attributes are needed to survive and thrive in the labor market? Of course, they use different words. I have simply rephrased. So I'll be talking about career readiness in general and career readiness in times of COVID. I would also want to clarify at this point of time, particularly to the students, that I have tried to pack in quite a few concepts. And I am not promising to explain every concept which is there on the slide. I'll pick up the important ones which are vital for our current understanding. But I have still, packed in quite a few of them simply because I assume that students who are interested in any of other, constructs which I have not touched upon, they may want to pick up those threads during quick Q&A session, and they may, search about those concepts and delve deeper into those ideas through internet or through their personal network or through writing to me or any other persons. So with this background, let me quickly start. See, I'll start with this report from ILO, which came up in August. And if you can see, this talks about, impact on jobs, education, rights, and mental well-being. So I have picked up few statements just to give you a backdrop of what is happening around the world. This report says that even before the onset of the crisis, the social and economic integration of young people was an ongoing challenge. As I said, we have been living in VUCA world for quite some time. Pandemic has just accelerated the process of getting it more complex and more ambiguous and more certain. Impact has been systematic, deep, and disproportionate. When I say disproportionate, for example, it has been particularly hard on young women. And as Dr. Kelkar and Dr. Menon have beautifully pointed out, Dr. Kelkar pointed out with the, as a generic, observation, and Dr. Menon pointed out based on her experiences of her own primary research, that for young women, younger youth, and youth in lower income countries, it has been disproportionately adverse. And heavy toll on young workers, destroying their employment and undermining their career prospects. So severe disruption. So disruption is happening on learning front, work front, and health front as well. So all these three, I would say domains of deterioration has, impacted the mental well-being. So all these constructs are very much intertwined. So when you talk about making career decision, as I said, there are universals. When I say universals, means there are universal ways to select a career, but in reality, because of systemic structures, we rarely follow those universal. But nonetheless, since quite a few students have asked, I will simply point out two quick ideas which we can discuss later in Q&A session. One is this whole idea of Ikigai. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this. This says, so first way to make career decision, you need to find your Ikigai. Ikigai is basically a Japanese concept which means reason for being. It may sound very philosophical, but if you look at the construct deeply, it's very practical, it's very pragmatic as well. So Ikigai, as you can see there, it's intersection of four circles. What I love to do, what I am good at, what I can be paid for, and what the world needs. The intersection of these four constructs basically make meaning of my life, decides my reason of being. Because if you see, if there are just two overlaps, it's something, we get something, but we lose something. So unless we base our career on the intersection of all these four circles, we are not going to have a fulfilled and satisfied life. So the first step towards career decision making is, I have found in last 2 decades that many of our young, friends, they're not sure exactly what are their passions, what are the area, where are the areas they are really able to perform well, areas of skills, the areas of abilities. And it's not just enough to look at the intersection of interests and abilities. If there is no, labor market demand, if you're not getting paid enough for that, then perhaps it's not your ikigai. So first step towards career decision making is you need to find that intersection, at least the intersection of your interests and ability. Next step, we need to take few steps. Now, when we say few steps, these 4 steps are, very classic career psychology, driven steps. First step is knowing ourselves, knowing our values, interests, strengths, traits, ambitions, exploring options. What are the industry trends? Where are the options? Where are the opportunities? And then we need to be focused about it. We need to plan based on the choices. Based on the first 2 levels of our understanding, we make decisions, we choose options, and then we prepare for those options. We take appropriate action. So these are simple, commonsensical steps to make career decisions in any times, be it pandemic times, post-pandemic, pre-pandemic. So this is what I call career decision-making universals. So, but then, I'm sorry, there is some little technical glitch, but no problem. Yeah. So when I say take steps, these simply outline the linear kind of a step: knowing yourself, finding about option, choosing from those options, and preparing for those options. But then a lot of particular things happen. For example, these universalities go for a toss in changing spaces. For example, if you're in rural India, if you're in urban India, if you're in tribal region, if you're a remote location, if you're in city, if you are in a metro city, if you're in a suburbs. So where you are located will largely determine what kind of career you will be getting into it, at what time of your life and what time of world's life, global life, at what time of national life you are making decisions. Like, which social group I belong to largely determine what kind of career I'm going to take. Of course, there is an idea of agency there. I mean, social groups can become immaterial in case of agency, like Dr. Kelkar was talking about autonomy and dignity, So if the person from disadvantaged background, the person from marginalized group develop autonomy and develop a sense of dignity, the career trajectory would certainly be different. It's like extreme events like pandemic or like economic crisis of 2008. All those situations also determine the kind of career trajectories our young people are likely to take. So one way to deal with uncertainty is we need to develop career resources. Now, 4 types of career resources we need to develop in order to equip ourselves to deal with any uncertainties, be it pandemic, be economic slowdown, or be any other extreme events. So these 4 areas are human capital resources, which basically pertains to your education, your skills, the knowledge about labor market trends. Social resources are very important to deal with uncertainties, like, key social resource is basically your social networks. Social network at personal level and social network at professional levels. If you are well connected, it becomes very easier to deal with uncertainties and deal with ambiguities, because people in your network can really provide you with key insights, key psychological support, and key informational support in the face of crisis. A lot of identity resources also you need to identify, develop, and leverage. Like, the concept of self, the whole idea of about your goal, and the congruence between your goal, your parental wishes, your community wishes, and labor market opportunities. And at the same time, the psychological resources are very crucial to deal with uncertainties, to deal with confusion, like optimism, hope, self-efficacy, resilience. These are some of the things which are needed, of course, at every stage, but more so in the times of pandemic. And out of 15, 16 questions, which Aisha has painstakingly put together from the participants' registration forms and given to me, a lot of questions pertain to these ideas whose solution lie in those psychological resources, like career resilience, like, idea of psychological components of employability, which I'll be touching upon very short. So 2 things I would be basically focusing on right now: resilience and hope. Let us look at resilience. Resilience, simply speaking, is ability to bounce back. ability to mentally or emotionally cope with a crisis or to return to a pre-crisis status as quickly as possible. So resilience has quite a few, aspects, intertwined. Here, I will just point out towards, one thing here, that is strong relationship. I have found in my own counseling work over, 2 decades, that people with strong relationship, both at personal and professional level, develop, resilient personality and develop, resilient career, which basically equip them to deal with any changing situation. So they are able to develop flexibility and adaptability. Other important construct is hope. Hope, when I say, I don't mean hope as a romantic notion, hope is, as a psychological construct, hope is perceived ability to derive pathways to desired goals and motivate yourself via agency thinking to use those pathways. I can see, a lot of heavy constructs maybe, but what it simply means that hope is an amalgam of 3 thinking patterns. Hope in a vacuum is just an idealized dream without any foundation. So when I say hope, when psychologists say hope, they simply mean there are goals, and those goals are clear in your mind, and there are pathways to those goals, and those pathways are clear to your mind, and there are enough agency within you to follow those pathways in order to reach those goals. So when I say hope, I simply mean that you are clear about your goals, you are clear about the paths which would lead to those goals, and you have enough motivation and agency within you which will drive you to take those pathways and to reach those goals. So those goals, there could be global hope, hope regarding this country, regarding this world, regarding your own life in general. There could be hope pertaining to the role you are preparing for to do in your career. There could be very, specific hope pertaining to very specific goal, So hope can be hierarchically organized. General, hope, role-related hope, and goal-related hope, goal-specific hope. So, this picture comes from a scholar called Spencer Niles. He talks about these 5 steps to career decision making, and he believes and he argues that hope is required at each of these 5 steps. Whether we are reflecting on ourselves, where we are getting clarity about our own interest, ability, ambitions, desires, pathways, our own vision, the choices which we make, and the way we prepare for those choices, and the way we implement the strategies. So at every stage, actually, hope is needed. Now, the final questions which I'll be quickly touching upon is what kind of skills and attributes are needed. See, quite a few researches have been done to find out the skills and attributes needed to ensure careers, to ensure a stable and fulfilling career in the changing world. But then I have just picked up one construct called career readiness. Career readiness is used as 3 levels: job readiness, work readiness, and readiness for a particular industry. And there are formulations which talks about convergences as well. So basically, whatever requisite competencies are there in order to transition from world of education to world of work. At times I joke with my student that world of education can be acronymed as WOE, W-O-E, and world of work can be shortened as WOW, W-O-W. So it's a process of WOE to WOW. As a teacher myself, I would never say that world of education is a woe in a metaphorical sense. But of course, the transition from world of education to world of work is basically career readiness. So who is a career ready person? Career ready person is someone who can navigate pathways that connect education and employment to achieve a fulfilling, financially secure, and a successful career. And career readiness has 3 components: academic skills. When I say academic skills, that means you are not just collecting facts, you are gaining insights and understanding, and you know how to apply those knowledge in the actual world. So right now, many scholars they are not using the word skills, they're using skillful practices. That means, are you able to use those skills in a specific context or not? If you're not able to do it, then again, it's not usable. The technical skills pertaining to a particular trade which you're preparing for, and the final construct is employability, which has really become a core. And basically, employability also focuses on immediate employment or intermediate employment or sustainable employability. And the current conceptualization talks about something called USEM model. USEM, U stands for understanding, not just collecting information, understanding, going deeper into it. S stands for skillful practices, which I've just explained. E stands for efficacy belief, how confident you are in doing a particular task. So self-efficacy belief of our students. And M basically stands for metacognition, your level of self-awareness, so that you can manage your life and strategies well. And career, these are some key competencies which are required across careers, whatever discipline you are preparing for. Oral and written communication, teamwork and collaboration, work ethic, professionalism, digital technology. Dr. Menon talked about digital divide. So digital technology, familiarity and expertise is also needed in order to be career ready in the contemporary world. We are talking about Industry 4.0, we are talking about Education 4.0, but our preparation, our institutions are actually still preparing our young people for Education 1.2, 1.0, maybe 2.0. So even labor market 3.0, we have not, Industry 3.0, we have not prepared our students well. So in global and intercultural fluency, leadership, critical thinking, so these are some of the constructs. Of course, there should be workshop on each of these things where we should go delve deeper into the skill part of it. But because of paucity of time, I'm moving to the final slides of key messages. First message is you need to find your ikigai. Means whatever defines you, whatever gives purpose to your life, whatever gives meaning to your life, you need to define that. Then you need to look for the options, choose those options and prepare for those options. You need to develop and leverage career resources. You need to build resilience. You need to develop a sense of hope. You need to engage in lifelong learning. With this, I come to Q&A session. I do have one more slide, which I will quickly present in 30 seconds after we get over with Q&A session. So yes, questions, please.
Anybody has questions, you can leave it in the chat box. I think we'll just wait a minute.
Sure.
I'd like to thank you for this presentation. I think given the issue of digital divide, we never realized how hard it was impacting on students until the LSR case happened. So we also need to take this issue much more seriously, and
right.
and of course what you said about resilience is very important right now.
True.
So I'm sure there are a lot of questions going through people's heads, but maybe we'll.
Yeah, sure. In the meanwhile, while the questions are coming, Aisha have already put together a set of questions for me. So let me go through those questions in case I don't get questions. For example, there are questions pertaining to how can we do research during a pandemic time. 3 of the research scholars, I guess, have asked the similar questions. Field work in the context of social research, I guess, as long as the issue of social distancing and all these things are happening, I don't think it's going to happen. But at the same time, I'm sure that a lot of us are engaging ourselves into tele data collection and other digital technologies which we are using. So this is time to leverage digital technologies in order to engage in research work, as I understand. Yeah, I hope there are some questions now.
No, I think most of the questions were already in the Google form, I'm guessing.
Okay, so let me take a couple of more questions from there maybe. Okay, so there is one question which says that there are several platforms like Coursera and Udemy offering free and paid courses for skill and knowledge enhancement. Do you suggest we opt for these? Of course. I mean, two things I would want to highlight at this point of time. I was reading through an article by a famous scholar called Herminia Ibarra in Harvard Business Review, and her article was on reinventing career during COVID times, and a couple of points which she mentioned, I thought it may be relevant for some of the students who are attending this webinar. First thing she talked about, we need to explore our different selves. When she says different selves, basically she's saying that we, at times in higher education, we get fixated to one career. And our elders also used to say that, I mean, we should focus our eyes like Arjun, on the eyes of the, moving fish. But in the current labor market, we need to talk about what is known as a career portfolio. It's not an era of 10 to 5 job. It's an era of 5 to 10 jobs in a lifetime. Or actually simultaneously, people are managing career portfolio. You can't depend on just one occupation. We need to manage quite a few of them, because within us, actually we wanted to do, all of us wanted to do many things, but we have always thought that we won't be able to do all things at the same time, but actually we can do. For example, I know persons who are teaching, who are making short films, who are doing content writing, who are doing counseling, who are doing research. So there are people who are wearing many hats. So the times like COVID gives you space to look at your multiple selves so that you can realize your multiple dreams at the same time. To build a portfolio of career rather than just fixating yourself on one career. This is one thing. And second important thing, which Herminia Ibarra has mentioned beautifully, she says that we need to embrace liminal spaces. Now, when she says liminal spaces, what does it mean? Liminal means that the pre-COVID time has gone. Post-COVID time has not yet come. So we want to catch hold on to something, and at the same time we want to let go of something, and we are in the middle. So that is what she says, liminal space. So liminal space at times unnerving, at times it's disturbing, but then there are psychological advantage of being in that space where we can't work at outer circumference, but psychologists say that lot of inner work, in inverted commas it must be highlighted, most of inner work happens when we are in a liminal space of introspection. It is, it is a space where a lot of complex emotions are vented out. So we need to really capitalize on that space where we are getting, these times are being, described in literature as the great pause. And the one of the advantage of being in pause is you get out of the rut of your daily routine. You get a time, you get a breather to think through. You may want to change the direction of your life actually. So I know many people whose life completely got changed in terms of their career trajectories. Of course, all of our lives got changed during pandemic, but for career trajectories also, because they could use that liminal space where they are not able to let go and they are not able to catch hold of what has not yet come. So that space is what we need to leverage on. And the final thing on this point is we need to remain connected and we need to talk it out. When I say talk it out, it's also for our mental health. It also to develop network in order to get familiarized with future career options as well. Like in terms of career option, mental health professionals are likely to see an obvious surge in the demand, in coming, days. I know quite a few mental health professionals who are getting, a lot of, clients during these times. So in terms of career trajectories, I guess, lot of career opportunities are available. But generally, I know that the organizing team wanted me to talk about, current career options and all. But as a career counselor, I have taken a stand not to, my approach has always been person-centric and community-centric rather than labor market-centric. I would want my students to be informed by labor market, but not being guided by, determined by labor market, because then we become slaves to the labor market trends, which we do not want our students to become. We want that their potentials are realized, the fruition of their abilities, the realization of their dreams is what we aspire as, a career advisor. Yeah. Any other questions which are there?
I think there are comments right now.
Okay.
Basically, I like the idea of career portfolio. Can you please elaborate with an example with a graduate course?
Yeah, so just I will relate to the questions which I was answering earlier. So like courses on Coursera, like courses on edX, like courses on Udemy, prepare you for other options. Like, let me give you one more example. I have borrowed the metaphor from World of Finance. The World of Finance is using an idea of what they call idea of optionality. So optionality is something which very limited downside but very high upside. Yeah. So for example, you did a course, let's say on X topic, and you devoted 12 hours. It was an online course you devoted. Many of your friends considered it a wastage of time. So there is some kind of a downside because you invested 12 hours in a particular course, but you were really enthused by the course content. And imagine tomorrow you are attending an interview, and somehow the guy who's taking interview has also attended that course. And somehow he had a question which you could answer because you have also attended that course. This is what in career psychology we call serendipity, or what is called chance happenstance. So these chance happenings, so you need to enhance your chances basically by creating optionalities where you are investing little, but you are creating, great upsides. So if you engage with quite a few things, you never know what is going to work. Just to add a personal note here, my basic discipline as a teacher is geography. I have been teaching geography for last 2 decades, but in my very first period, I realized that counseling is what I need to self-teach myself. So I kind of self-taught myself, then I attended courses, and a number of things happened. But then I could do many things because I wanted to do. And then later on, those things which I have invested because I wanted to, I was very passionate about investing, came back to me in multifarious ways, which I have never actually imagined. So during these times, you need to equip yourself with things which may not be directly connected with your current job portfolio, or which may not be connected to the course which you are doing. It may be something else, which may be very offbeat, but you never know how it is going to happen. Just to give some of the one or two examples from my own student. One of my students attended a course conducted by Red Cross, where she learned how to do first aid. And she attended a interview along with the topper of her class. It was conducted in an NGO setting. So her classmate, who was topper, and many times the Indian education system, particularly this evaluation system, just gives you an ego, and that to inflated ego that you are a topper. And with that ego, that students came in, went there for interview, and then she was expecting that since she had scored well, she'll get selected. But the other person who was, average scorer and all, but the two things went into her favor. One, the two employees of that organization was suffering from diabetes, and they were taking insulin on a regular basis. During interview, the interviewer got a call saying that today the person who was giving injection will not be turning up, so we'll have to manage on something else. So that girl overheard it and said, do you want someone who can give you injection? I have done a course on first aid and I know how to do it. And that girl also had a driving license. So these two things, driving license, at the same time a first aid course, landed her first job. So can you see, whatever you are gaining, so you are building skill literacy. And then there is a question pertaining to career portfolio. I simply mean by career portfolio that you are doing 3-4 things simultaneously as a source of income, so that even if the one income source goes down, you can capitalize on your other sources. So this is what I mean when I say career portfolio.
There's one.
Okay, so now there are questions like how do I apply for a job at a startup in India? I think Google would be a better informer on that. Okay, so you need to log into your Startup India website and think that website will give you many more information on that. Now there are quite a few psychological questions like how to balance between parents' pressure and all. I think I'll be very happy to conduct a session on how to deal with peer pressure and parents' pressure. And I don't think we have enough time to discuss those questions at this point in time. So I guess one person says, I have a question, please ask.
Hi, can you write down the question, please?
Or if you're finding it difficult to write down, I guess it's fine, Aisha, if the person unmutes himself or herself and says it.
Yeah, sure, they can unmute themselves. Whoever is comfortable. I don't know the name. Hi, can you please drop your question in the comments?
Okay, is there still a question?
Or maybe I can email a set of questions after.
Yes, that will be great. And the final slide I would want to present to you, which gives you my contact details as well, and couple of concluding thoughts. So one thought which I would want to end with, again, I started my presentation with some excerpts from ILO. In the same report, this line comes up. It says the voices, energy and resilience of young people are shaping a safe, more inclusive, equal planet for us all. This is what gives hope. And then one sentence from one of my favorite poets, Maya Angelou. Hope and fear cannot occupy the same space. Invite one to stay. This should be the final message from my end. For any feedback, comments, or any resources for your career development, feel free to write to me. And this is my email address. And this is my phone number. If students are interested in having a copy of this PPT, I will convert into a PDF and share with the organizers. And you can directly contact them. Thank you. Thank you very much for your patient listening.
Thank you so much, sir. Okay, the question is here now. Should I?
Yeah, I'm fine.
What if a person is confused between choosing a rational job, which I may think I can do well, which will be better for society, and choosing a creative field of job?
See, it depends on, suppose you can afford not to earn a good money because there is a strong backup, then of course you can do a creative thing. In my language of career psychology, I say that there are two kinds of options. One I call broadband option, other I call narrowband option. Broadband options prepare you for many career trajectories. For example, I'll give you an example from this. I'm sure you would have heard this Indian band called Euphoria, which is run by Palash Sen. I don't know whether you listen to Indian indie pop or not, but you can Google for Palash Sen or Euphoria. They have, belted out quite a few chartbusters. So Palash Sen is a doctor by profession and a musician by passion. He says that people may stop listening to my albums, but people will not stop getting, sick. So that means that medical as a profession is a broadband option, and music as a profession is a narrowband option. So you're talking about creative options, right? So if you are sound, financially sound from your family background, I would, of course, would recommend you to go for a creative field. But then what I would request you, go for a rational choice, build up your, financial wealth, keep on practicing your creative journey. And the moment you start earning more from your creative journey than your rational, so-called rational or traditional journey, then you leave your so-called rational option and then you engage yourself full-time in creative writing. Like, Chetan Bhagat, before becoming full-time writer, he was an investment banker. He earned good money, and then he can afford to engage himself as a full-time writer. I hope I have been able to answer your question.
I think that's...
Sorry, we are out of time now, so I think that was very helpful. The comments that are coming in also are saying that very helpful, very glad we attended the session. So thank you so much. Aisha, is there anything else that we need to?
No, that's it, I think. And can we have Ms. Damayanti for a while, if she can say some words?
Closing comments, yes, please. Damayanti, you have to unmute yourself.
I'm not able to. Oh,
okay. Thank you so much, Sachin. It was the first time I'm hearing Sachin under this hat, and I really enjoyed your session. And unfortunately, I couldn't hear the first speaker, but the second speaker was equally very well presented. And I think all the points resonated with the group very much. I really did not want to give any concluding comments or anything, but I must say that the whole webinar seems to have gone off very well. The students, I could see that it's resonating with the students and also the kind of questions which were coming. And thank you, Gayatri. Thank you, Aisha. Excellent job done. And I'm also very grateful to the panelists, because I know it's not easy at these times to put in so much effort, but I think everyone did put in that effort to be able to share their views. And for me, it was a very successful webinar, and I'm sure most of the participants also felt the same way. So thank you all very much.
Thank you again, and I think thank you, Sachin, for giving your email and phone number. And so if any of you have any questions that you are not able to express right now because there's been a lot to absorb, you would be able to reach out to him later. Before we close, can we just take one screenshot?
Yeah, can Dr. Ranjani and Dr. Kelkar switch on the video as well?
Those of you who can switch on your video, please do.
Feel free. I'll just click.